I know, advised them to get his Naboth's vineyard.
Oh yes, she did.
His own, I think.
Oh yes, that was a nasty piece of work on that one as well. She advised hubby to go get Naboth's vineyard, and she arranged things for Naboth to be killed. So she was not a nice person at all. But even prior to that, what did she do when she married Ahab and came to Israel? Who did she bring with her?
Baal.
That's right. So she brought Baalism into Israel. And she brought her prophets of Baal and priests of Baal. And you may remember that Elijah arranged that contest between the true God, Yahweh, the covenant God, and the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. And in the end, the prophets of Baal were killed under Elijah's direction because they failed the test. But when she married Ahab, she brought Baalism, idolatry, make a link there, into Israel. Now what else do you know about Baalism? Anything at all about the religion of Baal? It had to do with fertility, yes. My writing gets worse as I get on the bottom of the board. But it was a nature religion. And Baal meant Lord, in the sense of master. And this god is a false god, but the idea was that Baal, Lord, was associated with nature, and he could control the sun and the rain. So if you wanted to make your crops prosper and do well, then you had to get in good with Baal, and then he would send rain, and that would make your fields fertile, and you'd get ahead. And there was actually a male principle associated with this religion, and there was a female principle called Ashtaroth. Ashtaroth. And that was the female principle. And so a lot of the worship in relation to these gods involved sort of frenzied stirring yourself up to great sort of passionate stuff, and immorality was associated with it as well, because it was a fertility type cult. And so that's what Baalism was all about, and Jezebel was very much into that. Does anybody know where she came from? She was a Phoenician princess, and in Phoenicia, which was just to the north of the northern kingdom, there were two cities, Tyre and Sidon. They were the two key cities in Phoenicia, which was a trading nation. And so she came, she was the daughter of the Phoenician king, and so when Ahab married her, he thought he was doing well for Israel, because he's going to establish an alliance, you see, with this wealthy trading nation of Phoenicia, and that would enable Israel to get ahead and produce economic security and possibly some sort of military alliances and those sorts of things. So if you're thinking politically, and you're an astute king politically, you want to sort of shore up the prospects for your own nation. And so by making that marriage alliance, Ahab thought he was doing a good thing for the people. So can you see how Jezebel's influence came through that sort of weakness of Israel's king? Instead of remaining firm and trusting in God, he submits to this arrangement and imports idolatry into the country. And so the first thing that happens is that a true prophet of God called Elijah comes on the scene, and he marches into Ahab's court and he says, right, that's it, there's going to be a drought. So at the very point where Baal was supposed to be strong, that is control of nature, Yahweh sends his true servant in there and says, I'm going to make this country come to its knees by introducing this drought. And there's nothing you or Jezebel's prophets and priests can do about it. And so for 3 years, there's a terrible drought. So that's all back of in Israel's history. And now we find, any questions about that? Any questions or comments about the Jezebel of old? She was a real...
I understood that also she made them worship what? She taught
made
them to worship what? Idols.
Idols.
Yeah.
Well, yes.
And they taught, instead of worshipping God and bringing their offerings to Him, they brought it to. And that's one of the biggest things I taught them.
Yes, that's correct. So part of the worship of these two gods, Baal and Ashtaroth, was to worship the idols associated with them. So idolatry was brought in as a major problem. So instead of worshipping the true God, the Israelites were inclined to try to keep their foot in both camps. And you may remember when Elijah challenges them on the top of Mount Carmel, he says, look, if Baal is God, why don't you go serve him? But if Yahweh is God, then serve him. How come you're hobbling between two opinions, is the way it reads in the Hebrew. Make up your mind. You know, you've really got to make up your mind. You can't have it both ways. And so that was Israel's problem. They were trying to hedge their bets, so to speak. They were trying to have their foot in two different camps spiritually. And that was just so destructive for the people. And it was brought about by Ahab's very bad decision to incorporate this right into his backyard, quite literally. So that's the picture of what went on in the past. And you may remember that I said last time that this person in Thyatira wasn't necessarily that her name was Jezebel, but it's possible that she's a Jezebel figure. And, you know, remember the Jezebel of old, and this new first century Jezebel is now in your midst, and she is claiming to be a prophetess, some sort of religious figure, and she is leading people away into idolatry and immorality. And I suggested last time that this may have had something to do with the trade guilds. Because in order to get ahead commercially, especially in Thyatira, a city like that, where these trade guilds were very, very powerful, you had to submit to the things associated with the trade guilds, which could involve something like sexual immorality. And so here's a person like this first century Jezebel who is saying to the people, look, you can be Christians, but you can also engage in this sort of immoral activity and everything's fine. And I've had this revelation from God and it's all right. So encouraging the Christians to have their feet in two very different camps then. Okay, does that make sense? So that's the sort of spiritual problem that was being produced by this. Now Jesus promises a punishment in relation to this woman. And I've got this question here, what is the punishment and how does it fit the crime? First of all, what is the punishment that he said? What's he going to do to this woman?
23.
Sorry?
23.
Verse 23. Strike it down. What about verse 22? I will cast her on a bed of suffering, and I will make those who commit adultery with her suffer intensely, unless they repent of their ways, and I will strike her children dead. So how does the punishment fit the crime? Well, it's not that difficult. She's encouraging people to commit sexual immorality with her. For religious reasons, commercial reasons, whatever it was, she's encouraging sexual immorality. So God says, I will cast you on a bed. But it won't be a bed of pleasure, it will be a bed of suffering.